Hi, my name is Paul Ferrillo. You must be wondering why the hell a lawyer is here. Alarm bells I see in your eyes. I'm here because I represent some of the largest companies in the universe with respect to cybersecurity, data protection, data privacy matters. I advise on regulatory compliance issues, data breach issues, disclosure issues. Some of the largest companies in the country, but some of the smallest companies in the country as well too. Some small private equity firms who run $5 or $10 billion, up to private equity firms who run hundreds of billions of dollars. So I get to see everything. I get to see probably more than you do working inside your company, because I get to see almost every company. And I have some interesting observations, and this is where my speech came from, because I think we have now, with Cozy Bear and Fancy Bear, hit an inflection point in our cybersecurity regimes. And I see it starting in the bigger companies, but I see it now being needed in the smaller companies. By way of background, I've been a lawyer about 25 years. I teach at Harvard Law School. I teach the Boston College Cybersecurity Master's Program, and I'll be starting to teach it at Fordham Law School as well too. The reason for my talk today is talking about something that you may say, what is he coming talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning? He wants to just take our jobs, and he just wants to give them to the computer and give them to somebody else. No, that's not why I'm here. The reason why I'm here is that I feel that I want to make you superhuman IT people, superhuman network security people. And that's hard right now. Just guess, every 60 seconds, how many tweets get sent over all sorts of devices? Every 60 seconds. Guess? 100,000. How many text messages every 60 seconds? 11 million. How many emails get sent every 60 seconds? Close. 168 million. How many terabytes of data get created every 60 seconds? How many terabytes of data? Almost 2 terabytes of data. 90% of the world's data that has been created was created in the last 2 years alone. And those numbers are going to be going up and up and up. We're here to talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and its cousins, supervised learning and unsupervised learning, deep learning, which is a newer concept that's being put into existence today, as well as cognitive computing. The thesis of today's presentation is just simply, we need to do something different. What we're doing today in most companies isn't working out all that well. What we're doing in smaller companies and the small to medium-sized businesses isn't working at all. I'm horrified that we see ransomware attacks happening constantly 12 months after the first time we've seen a ransomware attack. That makes really little sense. What we're doing isn't working. We need to think about doing something else. And again, I'm coming from the perspective, some of the largest companies in the world are doing this today, changing from a securities operations center to a securities defense center and using some of these tactics. To date, 500 million records have been stolen. And to date, the HR jobs shortage, though that's not necessarily a bad thing, is a bad thing if you can't hire the right people and you can't hire the people that you need to staff your securities defense centers. That HR shortage is just going to grow worse and worse and worse over time. That is compounded by the growth in the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things is growing, and enormous quantities of data are being created every hour. According to some reports, the number of interconnected devices by 2020 will be 38.5 billion. 38.5 billion, up from 13 billion last year. That's a that's a rise of 285%. The growth in mobile technologies, these things right here. Do you remember when you got your first cell phone? I do. My dad had one. It was about this big. And it was so cool walking around East Hampton where we summered, and my dad would carry this huge cell phone that was about 18 pounds. Now I can do all my work. I can work from home. I can work from here, all on my smartphone through a VPN, through an advanced connection to my law firm. The amount of smartphones will double by 2020 to about 6.1 billion smartphones. The amount of internet users will more than double by 2020 to about, I'll let this nice lady help me for a second. The amount of smartphones will double by 2020. The amount of IP traffic over the internet will grow to 2.3 zettabytes of IP traffic by 2015. If we think we haven't seen anything yet, and I think one of the most important things that I point out to companies and corporations and boards of directors is that if you're not using machine learning right now in your securities defense centers, you can darn be sure that attackers are using machine learning to find vulnerabilities, to search for vulnerabilities in your systems. So either we do nothing or we do something to fight back. And that's the premise of the program. We're talking, and I think it gets worse when we start talking about things like ransomware and random generated variants of ransomware that get put on computers. We are seeing exponential growth in ransomware. Somebody gave me a statistic the other day, 100,000 new pieces of malware every hour are being detected on the internet. 100,000 pieces of malware every hour. The growth, absolutely tremendous. And here's the big problem. We saw this a couple weeks ago in a transaction. We've seen this at the DNC hack. What's dwell time? Tell me, what's a common definition of dwell time?
How long the attacker stays on the network before it's being detected.
How many days do you think?
I thought it was more like months.
How many months do you think?
Days.
Actually, it's 5. But it's 5. But it's close. But it's 5 months too long. And all of the factors that I've been talking about today just make that 146 days, according to FireEye, a continuing nightmare of a problem. Again, the HR shortage. We are seeing in different areas of our client base, not just network, but SCADA, ICS sensors, and other.
We did thumb drive. It's ready.
Oh, I don't have a thumb drive.
Where is the presentation?
It's in my head. That's fine.
Okay.
I think I'm entertaining enough. I don't need anything.
Okay. Paul, great to see you. As always,
Good.
he's a great professional.
And he's a great professional
Yeah.
too.
I'm also technical support.
YFARS, great incident responder.
Great, thank you.
Handsome guy.
Any incident, PowerPoint, computer, whatever you have, guys, cables, right? Fixing cybersecurity primarily, right? But if it comes to small things, it's also
All right, that's
Officially,
enough.
that's enough. All right. Pack it up. Can we go home?
You can stay if you want. Yeah, it's up to you.
All right, I'll just.
We didn't plan this, by the way.
Okay. Thank you.
So what's artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence is making machines intelligent by different ways and methods and training methods. There are several different types of artificial intelligence. Again, machine learning, deep learning, cognitive computing. Machine learning is the field that gives computers the ability to learn without being programmed. What does that mean? They get trained by data sets, by humongous data sets, and using algorithms which can be tuned to the data sets. The algorithm, the hardware learns and understands and can point out anomalies in the data set. In some sense, this is what is normal in a network versus what is not normal.
You never got your slides going?
I'm fine.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your concern.
But if you give them to me, I can drop them in on the video afterwards.
I will give them to you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. You're so kind. Predictive, so machine learning gets to the point of predictive analytics. It allows, it takes inputs, sends them through a method or a system that we'll talk about, and gets to outputs. It gives insights to data that we could never know on our own. It gives insights to your security and defense teams that you would never guess in a million years. Or if you could guess and hire 500 people tomorrow to run your security and defense centers, it would still take hours and days to resolve an alert. But that's not what we want to do. So I'm here to talk about a couple of different ideas about what's going on in the environment today. I have no dog in this fight. I am not a paid announcer. I'm not from Microsoft. I have no, but there are a bunch of interesting ideas coming on. The first is something called supervised learning. And you may have heard about supervised learning from the MIT CSAL program. That was data that was put out in a research paper earlier this year. What CSAL is supervised machine learning, where big data sets get sent through the hardware, the algorithm, and come out the other side to an educated securities defense person where input is given upon the output of the hardware. That gets put into the algorithm, the system gets trained, and over time the results get better. This program, which is run with Pattern X, has an 85% malware detection rate. Now you may think that's not so great, but that lowers the amount of false positives by tenfold, sometimes 15-fold, and that algorithm will only get better. Then there are unsupervised learning providers out there. Who are the unsupervised learning providers who are out there? There are two primarily, and there are others, leaving aside Alphabet, IBM, and others. FireEye. FireEye has a system called Invotas, I-N-V-O-T-A-S, which is an unsupervised machine learning program. The interesting part about this is one of the only machine learning hardware devices that actually will pull in sticks and taxi and threat intel feeds into the program in order to give you even better context. Now, there are people who would argue, the dark trace people, there are people who argue that totally unsupervised learning without inputs and without any other information is the best approach. I'm not here to argue which way or the highway. I can only tell you that we have them in use today in some of our largest clients in the universe, and we're not getting hacked. So we'll go, again, the goal is how can we do better? How can we do better jobs? Now, as an aside for 1 second, I thought I would get stones thrown at me if I talked about managed service providers and security as a service, so I decided not to go there. But essentially, if you want to turn machine learning on its head, managed service providers will do the same thing. The data is tremendous, and some of our smaller private equity funds are actually using managed service providers. To give you some idea about how incredibly efficient this is, for about $400,000 a year, you can have a managed service provider provide you information sitting on your network or sitting in the cloud. The data is enormous. 20,000 alerts the first year without managed services to 61 alerts with the managed services program. And 56 of the 61 were actually real substantive alerts. They were not chatter or false positives. So you know, the power of these machine learning devices is incredible today. Again, the goal, what's normal, what's not normal. Now let's talk for a moment about what's going on today in the large espionage world. The variant problem in malware, where attackers are using malware that's sleeper malware that'll sit on your network and look like a teddy bear and do nothing for 3 to 6 months. Then it'll awake and steal your stuff. Random number malware on ransomware, and malware that will actually know when it's being scanned and will again sit like a teddy bear and look pretty cute and go ha ha ha. So can machine learning tell about variant malware? The answer is, according to the best scientists today, answer is maybe. It depends on how long the malware has been on the system and whether or not the supervised machine learning apparatus and hardware and data sets have picked up any sign or a symptom of this malware. Now, if you use threat intelligence feeds in your security defense centers, that is one additional area of context that some of the pure unsupervised machine learning applications do not give you. So point to the threat intel feeds. We personally like them. We personally use them because we think, again, they provide context, even more context to a threat. All these things are in existence. And today, let's move to deep learning. Deep learning is Google DeepMind and other programs that are being thought about today. Deep learning uses something called an artificial neural network, which are replications of the neurons in your brain that can be made upon a scale of 3 to 6 to 9 layers, to 20 to 40 to 100 to 200 to 1,000, based upon enormous amounts of computing power that have the ability to take the input of a data set and run it through these complex neural networks to come out on the other side. These neural networks are in some sense only applicable to the big boys, because in order to train and fine-tune them, you need such enormous amounts of data that it doesn't make sense to use them unless you're talking about a major Fortune 100 or Fortune 200 company that just has this amount of data that it can then use and process. They're built from GPU chips, which are 100 times faster than CPU chips. These are the NVIDIA chips that you read about every day. I can tell you this stuff works. what is cognitive computing? You know, and I think, you know, we read a lot about Dr. Watson and about his ability to learn on the fly. The interesting part about IBM's cognitive computing solution is that it takes unstructured data. In some sense, call it the threat intel data in white papers, the threat intel paper in blogs and other things. It uses the unstructured data to in some sense, give more context to the actual data going through the network devices. You read about Dr. Watson as somebody who's just been born last year. Memorial Sloan Kettering has been using Watson for 5 years in order to help diagnose cancer. Other hospitals are using it to diagnose tumors on CT scans and x-rays. This stuff is in existence and this stuff works. Now, you may ask, what does this stuff cost? And you may say it must cost a fortune. No, wrong. It doesn't cost a fortune. Because today, the big three or the big four companies have so much raw computing power, they are now selling deep learning as a service. They're selling these things to allow companies to come up with their own solutions. So I have been quoted $500 per endpoint. Now, when you think about endpoints, that could add up to a lot of money. It doesn't nearly come to the amount that it costs to build a securities defense center with 100 people in each center, in 6 centers around the globe. $500 is parking. And that price, depending upon the solution that you're using, ranges far less. I've seen it for $100 per endpoint, which starts getting on the point of ridiculous. Now, the one thing that I wanted to stress to people, especially this room, since I'm aware and you guys are probably not, Watson will not eliminate jobs, but will raise the skill level of security personnel by enlisting Watson as a 24/7 watcher and giving tips when and where to find bad guys. Why do we need this stuff? Well, who works in an investment bank? Anybody? Who works in commercial banks? Insurance companies? Any other regulated entities? I do too. I represent a lot of regulated entities. And today, the amount of regulation from the Securities and Exchange Commission, the New York Department of Financial Services, and now the FFIEC, which is the banking regulator that covers the Department of Treasury, Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. There have never been more regulations out there than today regarding malware detection, 24/7 continuous monitoring, and a whole panoply, incident response, incident detection, and a whole panoply of other rules and regulations. And at some point, and this has been written about in the last few weeks with New York, and it's the new New York Department of Financial Services rules, it has been written that the cost associated with these rules will be tremendous and enormous. And one of the reasons is these entities simply don't have enough people. They can't hire enough people. And the amount of technology that you're talking about to make them compliant will be cost prohibitive. So where I started the conversation was something which I really, truly believe, and it's no offense to anybody in this room. The way that we're thinking about things and the way we're thinking about network security today isn't working. And I would argue, based upon the thesis of my presentation, which of course you can't see, the thesis of the presentation mean, and it can't get better. Budgets, resources, human resources, amount of traffic, malware variants, attackers, Russia, even China, which is coming back in different variants, not necessarily here in the United States, but we are seeing this in overseas subsidiaries of US companies that are sitting in Eastern Europe. The amount of network traffic simply cannot be handled by anything other than Thor or Captain America or Ultron or somebody of that sort. So we need to really think about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and why we're here. I have one little story, how I started my career, and I'll never forget it. I started in June of 2002 at my law firm. And I walked in to the managing partner's office, and the managing partner said, "You're going to be very, 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 very busy over the next year." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Do you know who hired us on the Friday evening before? WorldCom." Off on a plane, down to Washington, D.C., to the WorldCom corporate offices where I spent the next 6 months. And you know what I remember distinctly, and I was a lot younger then. I remember walking around the office and seeing the shell-shocked people in the office who lost everything, who lost their pensions, who lost their investments, who lost every bit of value in their stock. And it's something you can't forget, because I've actually seen it again with Lehman Brothers. This is public. I've seen it in other companies. And I can only imagine what the people at Target felt when they got breached. Not my client, I didn't do it. I can only think about the amount of breaches that have been out there, and think about what the people must feel when they've been attacked. I know stories from Mandy about walking on into the Sony buildings in Southern California, and him saying to me, it was like a bomb hit the place. So the moral to the story, and I don't want to take much more of your time, but happy to answer questions. The moral to the story is, I think we need to think about doing something differently. I think we need to be thinking about something that's, I don't want to call it next gen, because that's a bullshit buzzword, that doesn't really matter at the end of the day. We need to be thinking about something different, something new, something more advanced. And at the end of the day, you don't want to hire me if you get sued by the SEC or the OCC or one of the regulators for not being compliant, for not thinking about how to do something better. So let me stop for a second, and I skipped over a point, but I shouldn't have. Can you use machine learning for ICS and SCADA and industrial, in a factory manufacturing ledger bid type environment? The answer is, we think so. There's advanced research being done today by some of the companies that I have talked about, who are now putting in, machine learning into these industrial environments, which, by the way, were built before you were all born, which don't have sensors, which don't have the right hardware, which don't have the right logging or reporting systems. But this is going on today. So probably if I'm invited back next year, we'll say this is next level shit as it goes to ICS, as it goes to SCADA, as the stuff gets built out. So I appreciate everybody listening to the lone lawyer in the building, but I do feel really passionately about, and speaking to these scientists, I don't want my kids growing up into an environment like this, which is filled with terrorism, which is filled with criminality, and if there's something we can do better about it, we should. So does anybody have any questions, comments?
So you're saying that if, to make our security program defendable,
we have to be using some kind of, deep learning tool that's monitoring the logs and everything else.
Monitoring the endpoints
Yeah.
in particular. But I think it's a great question, because what does this look like? This looks like something out of, a Mission Impossible movie about devices and things that you see on a computer screen. But stories that, that the people at Darktrace have told me, they go into a company and they say, how many devices do you have? And they say, 25,000. So Darktrace is on your system for 7 days. That's all it needs to sit on your system. And they'll go back and give a report. And they'll say, oh, and your 50,000 devices that are on your network, and the IT people say, what, 50,000? Yeah, look at the number. It's on the screen right in front of you. So they're that specific. They can see the endpoints. They can cut off a ransomware attack in 15 to 20 seconds by knowing what's going on at the endpoint. So I'm not saying you have to do this. I'm saying you should think about it, because the situation is not getting better, and it can only get worse.
Just wanted to go back to something you said earlier from a regulatory standpoint. When I looked at some of the requirements for, let's say, the FFIEC or SEC, sometimes it leaves a lot to interpretation. I was just curious, from a legal perspective, are you saying that having these advanced tools would look a lot better in the eyes of a regulator? Let's say if you did get breached or someone was coming in for an examination.
Ding, 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 winner! Yes. What companies don't understand is that from a regulatory perspective, if a regulator's coming in after a breach, he's coming in after a breach. So automatically you look like a stupid idiot because you had a breach. So what we teach companies and private equity and hedge funds and investment banks is, the long list of guidance that you need to hire somebody like me for, and pay them $1,000 an hour, by the way. If you would just have a machine learning application, that'd be a hell of a lot cheaper than a person. That, in some sense, gives you 24/7 continuous monitoring, incident, intrusion protection, intrusion prevention. It gives you so many things at the end of the day. I'm not saying you're not going to get sued or dinged or fined. I'm saying it looks better holistically to have this sort of a system sitting on your network than not.
Yeah. If I could ask a follow-up, the reason why I asked that is some of those regulations, they require the ability to detect threats, and sometimes the language points to using a SIM tool. However, some of these advanced threat platforms, they're not really SIMs. So I'm saying, could you make the case that if a regulation says,
It's the same on steroids.
okay, all right.
Absolutely. And I've made that clear to the Department of Justice and other regulatory agencies, because if somebody looks at the SIM from 3 years ago, they'll say, oh my God, this is fucking ancient. You look at the Darktrace or the Invitas platforms, you say, wow, this is super cool. Even my son likes this stuff. He's like, I'm teaching my son, rather than go to law school and having to work, get $180,000 a year, he can go make $250,000 a year in his first year going to some of these companies. But nevertheless, it's a really good question, and I think for any of you in a regulated environment, having sat on the wrong end of these things, it's not a pleasant conversation. And despite what everyone says about the Department of Justice, and I believe this, completely, we won't treat you as a knucklehead, we'll treat you as a victim. If you don't have advanced platforms, incident response plans, the policies and procedures, you're gonna look like a knucklehead. And that's no fun.
Question: what are some of the tools that you personally use in this space?
I don't
Your
use.
firm,
Oh, I can't talk about my firm, but
About the tools.
the things that we are, what our clients are using,
Right.
are using the FireEye platform and using the Darktrace platform. You know, and again, this is today. You've got Deep Instinct that sits as a software that sits on the device itself, and you've got a bunch of different things that are in various stages of progression, but the two bigger ones today are FireEye and Darktrace. Both incredible platforms run by extremely smart people. Again, I see the interesting difference is FireEye uses the eyesight threat intel platform as an open API to pull in the threat data. I think it makes it a little different. Not a lot different, but a little different. Any other questions, comments? Well, thank you very much for sitting in my presentation today. Thanks for the great crowd. Very much appreciate your attendance.
Thank you for coming.
That's no problem. Thank you.
And just to mention, I know I've sat through some of your webcasts, webinars at your firm, which were really, really informative. So, you know, I would really recommend that to everyone as well.
And we have a new book coming out, by the way, One Hack Away from Disaster. We have a new book coming out in about a month. That'll be on the website as well too, which is kind of all about my presentation today, hint hint, about things that we can be doing differently and better to improve our securities and our network defense.
Thank you.
So thank you very much.